The now legendary Love Wins landed you on Time Magazine's 100 Most Interesting People of 2011 and struck a universal pop culture chord. Take us back in time to your initial vision for this book when the concept first hit you.
Well, it's interesting. No, I've never felt like I was building towards something. There was never a plan, and there was never like a 5 year. There was only ever the next thing I had in me to make. And so, Jake, that's why it's a really interesting question, is what was it all laid out? No. Whenever I tried to, like, people would ask, what's the 3 year vision here? I would just go blank. All I knew was that I have this idea for a tour, I have this idea for a film, I have this idea for a couple of these new sermons, I have a couple books that are rattling around. The only way it ever worked for me was, what's the next thing? So my book Drops Like Stars, which came out before Love Wins, was about suffering and creativity and the relationship between the two. And that was a coffee table book with these big thick paper images. So it was just, what's the next thing? And I kept noticing that as a pastor, people always had these questions, and how often it was a view of what happens when you die that was animating the question. And I noticed a number of people were raised with this idea that you might die and be tortured by God forever in hell. And I just noticed how many horrible things came about in people's lives because of that belief system. Like, there's these two different groups of humanity, and one's going to go to this eternal bliss and the other's going to be in flames with no end. And there were people who talked about the love of God and said, oh, but this God could also maybe torture you forever, just by the way. It just all seemed like nuts. And so in many ways, the book came out with actually literally the way that Jesus talked about heaven and hell was present states of consciousness. Like, we now can shape how the world is. And I just kept noticing how the people who talk the most about hell when you die talk the least about the hells on earth right now. So yeah, at some point it became like, I should write about that. I should show people that when Jesus used the word hell, he was referring to an actual physical place in the city of Jerusalem, the first century. That would be helpful for people to know. I should ask some of the questions about the absurdity of some of these beliefs that people were taught is just the way it is. Yeah, so it gradually began to come together, and the writing actually came quite quickly. And my wife had said, I think this is gonna kick up a lot of dust. And a couple of friends had read early versions and were like, yeah, this is gonna. I had done a sermon about what is the nature of this universe we're living in, and is revenge, you bomb us, we bomb you, you say this about me, I say something about you, that these cycles of violence and revenge are been humanity's fundamental problem. You do this to us, so then we get back at you. Like, these endless, it doesn't ever actually work. It's like violent, it's like ping pong. It's just everybody hitting the ball back over the net. But that the only way we're actually transformed is when somebody is like, no, I forgive you. I'm not going to keep the pain in circulation. And you do that because you believe that love wins. It's more powerful. So I had had this love wins being a way of thinking about your whole life. Like, do I choose to live in love? Is it simply the better way? No matter how tempting it is to extract revenge in some way or another. So I'd had these, and I remember thinking, oh, you should take that love wins. Because when you say it and when you've talked about it, people seem to grab it and do that heaven and hell stuff that you've sort of, because that's actually about love, and love is freedom. Love allows you to see it however you want. Oh yeah, okay, all that comes together. There you go. That's what that book is called, Love Wins. And then it should have an over the top subtitle, something funny, like a book about heaven, hell, and the fate of every single person. No one knows anything about the fate of every single person. So it became like, wink. No, very few people got it, but like, do some sort of wink in the subtitle that lets people know you're owning up to the ridiculousness of writing about the fate of every single person who's ever lived. Let them know that you're being totally serious, and you know what I'm saying?
Using this book as an example, what's your advice for aspiring authors regarding subtitles?
It depends on what you're trying to do. Sometimes the subtitle is the title. It all depends on what the person's. I mean, I love titles. Titling is like such joy for me. I could talk about titles all day long. I got titles for books that don't exist. I mean, I never stop. Once in a while I'll have a list going of titles for stuff I don't even know exists. Stuff makes me laugh. And I love doing the Robcast each week because I endlessly am coming up with titles. I don't know why, it just makes me laugh.
How overwhelming was that spotlight that got shined on you at that time as an author?
100 most influential people in the world. You can't say that without laughing. I remember the editor called me and he said, I just heard from Time Magazine, and this is all confidential, but you're about to be named. It's just some list some people in an office came up with. So you have to not take it seriously, but then it's also, wow, that's like something. So you're sort of in between, that's actually quite, wow, that's like really cool. And, oh, please, it's just a list. Early on, the only path was the path of integrity, authenticity, be with my family and friends, make the next thing, only write, speak, talk about experiences that you're actually having, only witness to what's actually working for you. So early on, I noticed that if it was all a performance, if there was any element of you're doing this thing in public that's not really what your life is like, that split was like a psychosis that would just make a person insane. And I watched people who had like a stage switch where they would get up and perform and then they'd walk off stage and be a different person. And I'd watched people in religion. I'd watched pastors who they did this thing that kept all the money coming in and everybody loved, and then they would confess to me what their life was really like. And I just saw that a number of times up close, and I was like, I can't do that.
Ain't gonna be me.
Yeah, no, it was like I had seen some things that I thought better just to quietly do your work over here and no one notices than to be in that kind of agony. And I noticed spiritual leaders would come to me like in secrecy. They'd be like, no one knows that I'm talking to you, because I'd lose my job if they even knew I was talking to you, but this is what I'm really going through. And I would be like, how in the world can a spiritual leader live in a world where they can't be true to who they are? That's not going to work long term. So I just couldn't do that. So even the responsibility or even that stuff that, no, the only thing is just to keep going.
What is the Bible? Is one of my father-in-law's favorite books of yours. What first made you decide from the outset to tackle that expansive topical territory?
I had been reading and studying the Bible for years, and at one point I was like, what if I just started typing up riffs on the Bible? I just kept noticing people didn't know the context of the Noah and the Ark story or the Abraham stories, that like there's a whole ancient Near Eastern context that when you hear what these different symbols meant and what was happening at the time, you're like, oh, that totally changes the way the story gets interpreted. So I thought I should just see how much of it's in my head. I thought, well, what if I just typed up, just pick one of those stories. Oh, okay, how about Jonah and the whale, Jonah and the fish? Oh, well, that's interesting because Nineveh, the city he doesn't want to go to, was the capital of Assyria, and the Assyrians had mercilessly bludgeoned his country. So there's no wonder he doesn't want to go get on that boat. These are the enemy. The crowd probably who heard the story was cheering him on that he didn't want to go get on that boat. So like the social political context of these stories gets really interesting. So I thought, why don't I just type up one of them, like almost like you're just telling it to a friend. And then we posted it on Tumblr. Remember Tumblr? And it was something about the act of just riffing on the story, reading it back through, correcting the spelling, and then posting it that freed something in me. So I started doing these posts, and then I thought, what if I just kept doing this for a while? And within, I don't know how long, there was like 100,000 words on Tumblr. And a publisher said, let's do that. That's a book. So then it was, okay, there's 100,000 words here. And I hacked it down to 70,000 words.
I've been there.
And I remember making a thumbnail. There was probably 40 or 50 sections, making thumbnails on the screen of the computer, and then just by the hour, just trying to find an order for these. It was almost like trying to find 50 beads on a string and how they would make a necklace. Yeah, that's how it all came together.
Wild.
And then I had never heard, people would always say, like, do you think the Bible is this, instead of what is the Bible? Because I noticed how few people could answer that question with any coherence. And that alone, it was written by people. So all of that sort of lofty religious talk about comes from God. What does that even mean? It was written by actual people. So you probably should know something more about the people who wrote it and where they lived and why they felt the need to write these things. That might clear up a lot of confusion.